In apartments 1 through 4, we somehow considered ourselves a family. Our house was a large, well-kept turn-of-the-century country house. It had once been outside the city, but over time the city had expanded further and further until the countryside was now at least a mile away. It was a huge place, and its previous purpose was doctoral practice, and my 5 rooms on the first floor still had interesting bulges and dents in the wall where something had once been screwed, and the original parquet floors that looked amazing, but were a little cold for the feet. An old photograph in the foyer showed the place in Edwardian splendor with red bricks. These red bricks were faced after the war due to bombing and cheap repairs using inadequate bricks. However, the white painted plaster looked good and was repainted every 3 years as per our maintenance agreement. I occupied half of the first floor, and Tony occupied the other half. The apartment upstairs was owned and occupied by a very nice couple called Jane and Rick, and the apartment above me was empty as the previous occupant, Mr. Hannigan, could no longer climb stairs and had moved into a supervised nursing home. We all got along great and regularly had summer barbecues to which we invited a few friends or close relatives. For me, it was sometimes my boyfriends or my parents or my sister and husband and my beautiful niece Emma. Tony lived in the apartment opposite mine on the ground floor and heard my mother talking in the garden. I really liked Tony. Tony was funny. Tony was goofy. Tony was wonderful. Tony was a 10, but he didn't realize it, which in my opinion made him an 11, maybe even a 12. At the end of my holiday, I was relaxing in our huge garden, trying to get a tan before heading back to work. I was a manager at a travel agency. I loved my job and always had, and a tan was kind of a requirement. So I was lying in the garden in a tiny bikini with my bra straps undone when I heard him behind me. "Wow, Andy, you look amazing." "Thank you," I said, holding my bikini top. Tony fell silent and his mouth fell open as he had the opportunity to admire me in the 4 small triangles of red fabric. We exchanged a few glances and I blushed, hoping that he would flirt with me and invite me to dinner. Tony was a fitness trainer, working with individual clients, but more often than not running after-school camps for dozens of yummy mommies, then fitness classes for seniors, to classes at local community centers or nursing homes. Being only 2 days younger than me, we often had joint birthday parties in our garden and always got along. The following weekend after my tan, we had another BBQ and had a great time. Tony spent the night in my bed. Even though the sex was too fast, I blamed the alcohol. It became a weekend affair. He came to see me on Saturday evening. I would cook dinner, we would relax on the couch, and then end up in bed, but I limited the alcohol. It helped a little by doubling the time, but it was still pretty short. He stayed for lunch on Sunday, then returned to his apartment. This went on for a while, but like all relatively good things, it came to an end. Her name was Louise Gray, and God forbid if anyone called her anything else. She would turn pale if someone called her just Anne, then correct you and walk away if someone called her Annie. She said Tyrwhitt loudly and told those listening that she was a Gray with an A, even when it was delivering food to her home. She was starting out to be sweet and friendly, but I knew that the moment her eyes met Tony's, my time as a casual Saturday friend was over. It didn't start that night, not immediately, but after a week I realized that the hot guy from the gym would no longer pay attention to his neighbor, so as not to ruin the chance he might have had with the flight attendant. We were lovers, and we had at least 8 months for it to become more than just that. It was nice sex, but not wonderful. Tony was passionate before and during, but afterward he returned to being the smiling prankster next door. He never looked at me the way he looked at Louise. I was annoyed by this. I had no reason to, and no right to claim Tony's feelings beyond the fact that we slept together a few times. With the benefit of a rear view during the following cold and lonely Saturday nights, I realized that we had only had sex in my bed, eaten my food in my kitchen, watched my TV, and made out on my couch. I was the easy, commitment-free friend who was always there, good for a few free dinners when his fridge was empty, and who never needed to be introduced to his friends or, heaven forbid, his parents. He stopped showing up at family parties when my family was around, not after we slept together, at least, whereas before he always went out into the garden when the grill was lit to get a burger. Previously, on November 5th, there was always a bonfire and fireworks, and people came specially. My family and Rick and Jane's family shared expenses. Rick bought and launched rockets and fireworks, while Jane and I catered for a dozen or so friends and family. Yes, Tony opened his patio doors and watched, standing where the free food was being handed out, holding one can of beer. I could see from the flashes from the sky that he had obviously renewed his can, as the new one had a price tag from the 7-Eleven store that was not on the previous one. Yes, he was stingy, but deep down I still wanted him. The following Friday, I saw him while carrying 3 heavy bags of groceries from the car. "Big dinner?" he asked. This was Tony's short way of checking to see if anyone was visiting me. "No," I said, "just a little old me." I expected him to offer to help me bring them in, see what he liked, and offer to come in and bring the wine. This did not happen. Instead it was, "Well, have a nice weekend." I angrily carried the bags inside. As I unpacked the food in the freezer, I remembered the last time he came over and we had sex. It was a month ago, no, 5 weeks, on the eve of Louise's move. That's what it was, of course. She was prettier than me, blonde, probably 4 or 5 years younger than me, but without my curves. That Saturday night, I found out where Tony went for dinner on Saturdays. As if karma showed me its mythical nose, I had just settled in for a marathon Netflix binge when the doorbell rang. 4 of them called, but since I lived in apartment number 1, my call always sounded first. I climbed out of my chair and trudged to the front door. I opened the door, and standing in front of me was a young guy in a pizza delivery uniform. He looked at the label on the end of the box. "Tony?" he said. "Apartment number 2. I pointed to the highlighted name above the second call button. He stared at her as if it was a very difficult concept. "Sorry," he muttered. "This door, buddy," I said, stepping back so he could enter, and pointed across the hall. "Thank you," he said, and went there. I walked back to my door, and the pizza delivery man knocked on Tony's door. As I was closing my door, I heard a loud, slightly hoarse voice. "This way, guy," from Tony, who apparently opened the door to Louise's apartment. At least when he came to me and we had sex, I cooked real food for him and didn't order from an app. The pizza, however, served its purpose because as I lay in my large but lonely bed, I could hear a very distinct but familiar creaking sound from above. I had a few relationships before him, and Tony never reached that level. We'd snuggle up on my couch until our passion took over, and we'd retire to my bed, where he usually stayed overnight, although he sometimes left at small hours due to some obligations the next day, sporting events, charity causes, and he would kiss me on the cheek, apologizing, insisting that he didn't want to wake me up in the morning. I asked him if I could come and support him just once. He hesitated for a few moments, and then smiled with relief, thinking, "There won't be room in the van. I'm taking a couple of friends who are helping." I asked where it would be so I could bring refreshments to the finish line. This time he was faster, saying it would be far, I don't know the place, and he only has one parking pass and it's strictly limited. That was the first message of, "Fuck off, Andrea. We're not that kind of friends." I remembered a joke I heard on a short cruise in the Mediterranean. It was a late show, and the jokes were pretty risque and crude, but I was clutching my sides along with my friend Gail. The comedian ended the joke with the words, "Of course I love you. We're having sex, aren't we?" And at that moment, I finally realized that we were sex friends, nothing more. If he wanted sex on the weekend, he would wait until I got home on Thursday or Friday. Then a nice conversation would begin, and we would make an appointment. For that matter, I knew where I stood. Since then, I decided that two people can play this game. I made sure I was unavailable on some Saturday nights, even if it was just to go see Mom and Dad or Roxy, Dell and little Emma, who was getting cuter every day. I came home late and tried to tiptoe around in case Tony was listening to me, as he had once been. He tried to persuade me to let him into my bed or kitchen, but I refused, and he turned into an offended Labrador. Sometimes I did throw him a bone. I knew he was a jerk who used me for food and sex, but I accepted his opinion. He was an easy and harmless sex partner. I didn't love him, and he didn't love me, and I didn't see a future with him. I allowed him to come to my bed at least once a month so that he would not forget me. Now that the perfect Louise had arrived, it didn't matter anymore. She was giving away the goods, and I assumed I was no longer of interest to him. The girl's pride was a little bruised. Of course, I went from dinner swapping to spinster, and he dumped me for a double barrel of beauty in the apartment above mine. One evening, when a strange weather anomaly made our house quite warm, it took me a long time to adjust the thermostat to the way I wanted it, so I simply opened the small vent window above my bed. This way I could hear the lovers upstairs. Lying there in the too warm, but still too hot, musty air, I turned off my phone and rolled over to go to sleep. I fell asleep fairly quickly, glancing at my alarm clock on the bedside table, which showed that it was a little before 11. During this time, he would kiss me on the cheek and say, "See you." What I'm saying is, it was a Thursday night and we've never had sex in the middle of the week, not once. I woke up early, feeling recovered from the night's experiences. Tony was with Louise and was never with me. I showered, ate a bowl of cereal and drank a cup of tea, and was ready for the day. I closed the door to my apartment and picked up the mail, bending over in my tight, short blue skirt that I was supposed to wear at the agency, and turned around when I heard the creaking of the stairs. It was Tony wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt and looking haggard. "Good morning, Tony," I said with a giggle. "You're a beast," I almost screamed in fake congratulations. "SHHHHH," Tony said, putting a finger to his lips. "Louise is trying to sleep." "Yeah, well, you definitely didn't let her sleep half the night." "Andrea, please," he cried out almost in despair. "Damn it, buddy," I said with a hint of reproach. "You've never come out of my bedroom so quietly. The whole damn neighborhood heard you." It was true. Jane told me that the first thing she knew about our connection was when she heard my door slam, and then Tony's door. "Yeah, let's not shout it from the rooftops, okay, Andrea?" I patted him on the cheek. "Too sensitive, buddy," I said. "But that's always been your problem, hasn't it?" "Honey?" I winked at him with a big smile. Revenge. It tasted quite sweet, at least temporarily. The next morning, I woke up completely refreshed and still feeling energized. I was in the hallway getting mail out of the basket when I saw Tony's door was open. "I'm so sorry, honey," I heard him mumble from his hallway. "It's just—" "Don't worry, Tutu," she purred in response. So? Looks like Dorothy, the dog from The Wizard of Oz, doesn't it?" She continued with sweet words. "It just surprised me a little, that's all." I heard the smack of a kiss. "You're picking up my dry cleaning today, aren't you, Tutu? Aren't you?" "Yes," he answered with clear confidence, greater than I had ever heard from him. I couldn't even get him to buy sodas for one of our summer parties. "And that money for my gas and electricity. I need to check. On my account." "You're glad to be in the comfort of my apartment," she said. "Anyway, you know I'll thank you, Tutu. At least I only had sex with him. I never took money from him." It was strange. We didn't share electricity. Each apartment had its own gas and electricity meters, for which we were all individually responsible. The weather turned Arctic cold again, and my window remained closed until the end of February. I had a long Saturday to work, and I saw on my calendar that the cheap tickets I'd booked for Tony were ready to be printed. These were tickets for a stag party in Prague, and I used the staff discount to put him and his friends on an EasyJet flight to a nice but cheap hotel, cheap alcohol, cheap food, and perhaps something contagious from the other cheap entertainment that they could find there. I took them home and knocked on Tony's door, which Anna Louise answered. "Oh, hi," she said. "Hello," I said, holding the brightly colored envelope. "Is Tony home?" "For what?" she asked with a smile worthy of the worst cinematic Nazi. "I have his tickets for the weekend," I said. I could hardly argue that it was none of her business. She opened his front door, which I never did. "I'll take them," she held out her hand. The concentration camp smile colder than before. "Well, tell him I hope he has a good time." "Yes," she snorted, her face losing all expression except mockery. "EasyJet," she almost snatched them from my hands. "Is that the best you could do?" "Tony and his friends wanted cheap," I said. Knowing she would want to correct me, they asked me to organize a cheap and cheerful weekend. Maybe you can organize their next trip. See you. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the front door, knowing that my ass looked really good in that skirt. I didn't see anything else of her or Tony for the rest of the week, and there was another car in our small four-space parking lot. Tony's dark-toned fitness van parked on a busy road for some reason, not safe in the parking lot, away from sharp turns and narrow corners. On Friday, I had dinner ordered, and feeling full and satisfied, I went to bed with a glass of water and on-demand movies. As I was scrolling through my phone, I noticed a photo on FB Messenger Tony had sent me of him and his drunken friends in some shady-looking bar, all in good spirits thanks to the empty bottles of beer that littered their table. I smiled, counting this as a plus for Andy. As I went back to selecting a movie on Netflix to watch on my bedroom TV, I stopped when I heard a noise from above. The creaking was distinct, slower and possibly louder and much longer than the previous occupant. I went back to Facebook, and there were new photos of him and his drunken friends posted a few minutes ago, so it definitely couldn't be Tony up there. There was no chance that I would open the window against the chilling night air, and I assumed that Anne Louise would not either. But her lover solved the problem for me. The creaking became louder and louder, just like Anne Louise. "Oh God, Jeff, damn, please don't stop," she screamed. The next morning I was at work and, not seeing any mail, I unlocked the front door, holding it open for a tall, dignified, just starting to go gray, uniformed airman with a big smile on his face coming down the stairs. Why not? His plastic badge announced him as Captain Jeff Rotheray, and it was obvious that he had had sex with the beautiful and sexy air hostess Anne Louise Tyrwhitt Gray the night before. I smiled back. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I answered with a smile. Obviously, I didn't have as good a night as he did. He got into a strange car that started up with a noisy, dull hum, and I saw the Jaguar logo and several letters starting with X. It sounded expensive, at least. When I got home, Tony's van was back in the driveway. Anne Louise must have lowered her standards considerably and moved it back to the spot where her other lover's Jeep had once stood. Somehow this irritated me more than the new man. Apparently, she had the key to Tony's apartment, and she must have gone down and moved his van and all the tools of his trade, his entire business, out of the safe and secure parking lot that he had paid for as part of his lease and which he had looked after. Her own CCTV system so the man she slept with could park his expensive Jaguar there. It screamed wrong. As soon as he left the country, someone else took over his tool of the trade, where Tony's van used to be. I wanted to contact Tony and tell him. Okay, I was no longer in his life, but I still considered him my friend and didn't want to be abandoned, at least not by her. I did not sleep well. My brain oscillated from tell him Jeff was in his parking spot and in the bed he slept in to his monkeys, his circus, repeatedly. But that's none of my business, is it? I had fun with Tony, and then he left me to win the stewardess. Who knows, maybe they had an open relationship, like me and Tony. Obviously. He returned the following Monday afternoon and was full of praise for the events and accommodations I had arranged through my firm. I unlocked the front door and held it open for him with a smile. He looked really happy, and I had a fleeting desire to drag him over for some sneaky revenge sex, given that his vacation had gone so well. "Oh, Andy," he shouted loudly as he dragged his suitcase from the curb where the taxi had dropped him off. "Prague was incredible, babe. I've never been there, but the hotel. Damn, they took such good care of us, especially the groom. They gave him breakfast in bed with a hangover cure. It was great. Thank you very much." He put his arm around my shoulders and kissed me loudly on the cheek. This coincided with Louise standing at the top of the stairs with her arms crossed, and, as Roxy would say, face like someone who's been kicked on the ass. "Anthony," she said with a certain tone. "Babe," he shouted upward, spreading his arms as a sign of his good nature. "Leave your suitcase here. I'm not going to wash your clothes." She turned around and walked back to her room with her nose in the wind. I looked at him with raised eyebrows, and he responded with a sigh. He opened his door, threw his suitcase inside, and closed the door. I opened my door as he ran up the stairs, and I paused to listen to what they would say about me. But they didn't talk about me. "I hope you didn't blow all your money in the Czech Republic." "Babe, did I have to pay my share?" "Well, you're going to expect to sleep here tonight, aren't you? Gas and electricity don't pay for themselves." I got up and left for work, not hearing the usual sounds from above, but seeing a sleepy Tony come down the stairs in a t-shirt and boxers, carrying jeans and what seemed to be a pile of women's clothes, mostly underwear, and a pizza box and an empty one, a bottle of Coca-Cola Zero. She had no intention of washing his clothes at her place, but I could almost hear her gentle tones and, "Since you're washing your clothes, tutu." Insolent bitch. I felt like I was buying my time in bed with Tony by offering him Saturday night dinner and the occasional Sunday breakfast and lunch. But damn, if anyone paid to have sex with anyone, it was Tony. He was handing over money to stay with her, and with a smile and a shake of my head, I took his pizza box and bottle. The bottle went into recycling, and when the pizza box fell into the trash, I saw a label with the name Tony on it. At least when he had sex with me, I paid and cooked food. His problems. I went to work and organized 4 more family holidays with 3 worried couples and one annoyed one who was unhappy that the pound wasn't buying as much as it had for the same holidays 3 and 5 years ago and blaming the country they were going to. Spending 2 weeks sleeping in their beds, eating their food and drinking too much of their alcohol, which seemed to be their main reason for the trip. I returned home, and it was nice to see that Rick had started putting up the outdoor Christmas lights since it was now the 2nd week of December. I promised to put on jeans and sneakers and help. I did this, and within an hour and 20 minutes, everything was ready. As Rick, Jane, and I stood back to admire our work, a sigh was heard. "And who will pay for the electricity for these lights?" Jane rolled her eyes at me and turned around. Her special smile for Louise was already ready. "We, dear," she said, not bothering with the hyper-correct form of address her upstairs neighbor demanded. "Look, they're coming through our window, so don't worry." Although I would have felt completely humiliated by her motherly tones, the sarcasm just flew over the flight attendant's head after a day of work. We had our usual Christmas party at home, which had previously included a variety of food and drink in our kitchens, the front doors ajar, and our families around with everyone in general, with Rick's stereo at the top of the stairs playing Christmas tunes. Jane sent a message to the home WhatsApp group, and I replied saying I would bring it and said I would make my usual mulled wine. Louise responded next, telling the group that she was on a long-haul flight across the Atlantic that evening and would have to apologize, adding another message that this kind of party was really not her style. Rick didn't answer, but he didn't usually. His excuse for the last 2 Christmases was office party at work, but the idiot was self-employed. It was just another of Tony's stupid excuses, and he turned up between 10:30 and 11 that evening in a smart, going-out shirt and trousers, looked fleetingly surprised, and with a big smile started helping himself to the food and drinks that the rest of us paid for within the last hour. We knew it would happen, but this year, since Louise had already given up, I texted Jane and said we should all gather in my big living room and turn on the stereo when we knew Tony would knock on the door. That's exactly what we did. It was a wonderful evening, despite everything. Jane picked up my 2-year-old niece Emma and hugged her for a long time, looking through Emma's pink pigtails at me, her mother, Roxy, then at her mother. I definitely need to get one of these. She kissed the little pink cheek and passed it into my arms for my turn. Jane's parents heard and laughed, and her mother, Jill, tapped her watch. Rick smiled. Jill has been pestering us about grandchildren since we got married. Every time Jay sees Emma, I think her ovaries are releasing half a dozen eggs. Jane simply smiled at him, placing her hands on her sides just above her hips as if to confirm it. We, Rick and Jane, exchanged gifts, even one for Emma. At 11, we heard a knock on my door, to which we all smiled and decided to ignore. Rick took the batteries out of my doorbell, and with the thick winter curtains closed on the patio door, I guess Tony went to bed hungry. Everyone left and went home, and I went to bed, waking up for work the next morning without a hangover. The day after Christmas, Tony loaded his suitcase into his van, slamming the side door loudly and rubbing his hands against the cold. "So, Andy, have a great Christmas, huh?" "You too, buddy," I said, leaning forward and offering my cheek for a kiss. "Are you going to Mommy?" "Yes," he said. "I'll be back on New Year's Eve." "See you then," I hugged him and watched as he got into his van and headed to a small town about 30 miles from ours. I met both of his parents, and his mom really accepted me. I think she was looking for grandchildren too. I had Sunday off, but I was back at work the next day, and with busy Christmas Eve shoppers looking for last-minute gifts, rather than for next summer's holidays, we pulled down the shutters, locked the front door, took down the corporate Christmas decorations, replaced by new posters and stands featuring the sunny blue sea, ready for the big hit we were expecting when the Boxing Day specials went online. I went straight to my parents with my bag and various wrapped gifts, and after midnight mass and hot chocolate, I slept in my old single bed, tiny compared to mine. I had an amazing Christmas day with Emma sitting on my lap, and I felt that glow I always had when I was around her. I loved everything about her. However, it was still a lovely day, and after packing my work clothes for the next day, I slept in for a second night and drove straight to work on Boxing Day. The center of our little town was literally pulsing with potential clients. Instead, I went home on the weekend and watched all the Christmas movies I had saved on my hard drive. The next morning, I got up and went to work with much less to do than on Boxing Day. My colleague told me he had been just as quiet the day before. When I returned home, another unknown car was parked in the bay marked with a large painted number 2. This time it's not a Jaguar, but a low-slung Beamer convertible. This time I took a photo of it because our lease agreements only allowed residents' cars to park there and further stated that we were required to report any misuse to the management company. Having saved the photo in the cloud, I left everything as is. I guessed that whoever owned the BMW was staying the night, and Louise's comment, "Oh my God, Mike, damn it," was added to the squeaking sound for good measure. The next morning I showered, had some tea and a bowl of cereal, and walked out into the hallway in my company uniform with a handful of mostly junk mail in my basket. On the floor above, there was the sound of Louise's door opening and some slurping kisses, which suggested that the morning goodbye was much more emotional than with Tony or even with Jaguar Jeff a month earlier. To the last "call me," I finished sharing the junk mail and looked over my shoulder at a man coming down the stairs wearing another pilot's uniform, this time from an airline affiliated with my travel agency. "Good morning," he said when he saw me in the same suit as the flight attendants during his flights, but without the perfect makeup and styled hair that they needed to order. The devil caught up with me, and I saw his name badge turn so he could read mine. "Good morning, Mike," I said, adding as much familiarity as I could. He read mine. "Good morning, Andrea," he said after a pause, and when I opened the front door. We walked down the path to the driveway, talking quietly to me, explaining that I was the manager of the downtown branch of the firm we both worked for, and explaining that I had flown on our airline to Rome that summer. He asked if I had ever thought about becoming a homemaker like my flatmate Anne. I said it was an option from my college course, but there was a lot of standing, and it wasn't really that glamorous. He nodded in agreement, pointing to the front of our large house, where the Christmas lights still twinkled against the gray morning. Among those flickering lights, I saw blonde hair and half a face that I knew was struggling to understand how well Mike and I knew each other. Mike said something funny about our employer and their profits, so I laughed and rolled back a little, glad that I was instilling doubt in that overactive brain under the blonde hair. Mike and I said goodbye, and he held my car door for me. I grinned, and with a final, "the devil made me do it" smile, I blew him a kiss of gratitude as I reversed onto the road, in view from the hallway window. This fully prepared me for today, and I had rehearsed my answers to any "how do you know Mike" questions I might be asked. As much as I tried many convoluted Machiavellian answers, I knew that, in the end, lies beget more lies, and that I would go for the "I don't know him." But we wore the same uniform gambit, just to letting her know that she wasn't worried about anything. As I drove home to 3 empty parking spaces, I knew she was probably flying across the globe again, deciding if she was going to seduce the pilot, since the man she usually had fun with was at his mom's house for another day. Most likely she was. The next evening Tony was home, and I was in my usual place counting the squeaks. The new year was spent with me at my mother's, and we all went out into the garden when the clock struck 12. Now obligatory fireworks, hugs and kisses from all sides. When I returned home at 1 in the morning, I saw another strange car in Tony's place, this time a tall black Range Rover. Seriously? I knew that if Tony's van had not been there, he would not have returned that evening. He might have been a bitch, but he wasn't stupid enough to drive drunk. I know he had a fold-out mattress and sleeping bag in his van and slept in it many times instead of driving home. But my goodness, he was probably just across town, parked in his club's parking lot while some anonymous flight crew member actually took his place. Technically, at least. It was no use. I took out my phone and took a photo of it, and the built-in flash told the waking world what I was doing. At least no one noticed, and all of Louise's windows were at the back. Lying quietly in my bed, I listened to what was happening upstairs. This time, a certain Pete was in Tony's apartment. I woke up at my usual stupid hour, and even though I didn't have to go to work, I still got up, showered, and hung around my bedroom, dressed and ready to go, listening to the telltale noises. I heard the doors closing and decided that she was seeing him off. I opened the door and went out into the corridor. I didn't have mail, and of course it was New Year's, so I went up the stairs and saw that no one was there. I gently closed the front door, quietly opened the front door of the house, walked out into the driveway, and walked to my car. I started the engine and waited for the foggy windows to clear, and looking to my left, I saw a tall guy, much younger than Jeff or Mike, but wearing normal clothes. Just as I was about to pull out onto the road, Pete opened the rear passenger door, and there, attached to the rear headrest, were hangers, the same flight attendant uniform that Jeff wore, with silver wings on the sleeve, jacket and pulled-up black buttonholes on the shoulders of a white shirt. Isn't Pilot Pete a character from the children's series Angie Benji? With the biggest smile on my face, I drove out onto the road, not even having the slightest idea of where I should go. I couldn't go to my store because the alarm wouldn't respond to my off setting because the computer knew the store wasn't supposed to be open. I drove to my sister's house. I knew Emma would get her out of bed as soon as the sun came up. On the way, I passed a small cafe that we went to several times from her house, and the light illuminated several people inside. I pulled into a parking space almost outside and turned off the gas, going inside to have a full English and all the tea I could drink. By 9:30, I was freshened up and headed to my car, and the center of the small town came alive. I decided not to go to my sister and brother-in-law. I knew I would be greeted warmly, but I didn't want to be that sister. No other half. No one would even come close to this position. Not even the guy from across the hall with whom I always had a special relationship. I drove home and parked in my usual spot when a slightly bleary-eyed Tony pulled up next to me, where his immediate predecessor's Range Rover had pulled out an hour and a half earlier. "Hi, Andy," he said with the same composure that he had with me these days. We used to almost have a shorthand and could communicate like lovers, but over the past few months that warmth and familiarity has completely disappeared. I was given less recognition than Jane, who was a little older and married him in the apartment above him. "Hey, Tony," I said, "one more night riding around in your van getting angry at the football club." Tony was the first or second member of the local team he'd played with since he was a kid, and after a club night, he would roll down the driver's window an inch or two and fall asleep as a simply angry, safe man. In the corner of the car park, innocent among the club minibuses and a few trade vans who had paid to park in their car park out of season and not during home matches. "Yes," he said, scratching his hair and looking embarrassed. "Shame on you," I said, then dared. "Won't Louise take you home?" "She was working," he said. "She really wanted to come, but she had to work, and she had to return home only at 2. I'll go straight to bed at my place so as not to disturb her." He smiled whimsically. I wrinkled my nose as quietly as I could. I could vouch for what time she went to bed. I ended up listening to her and Pilot Pete making love until at least 2:30, when I fell asleep. "I'll take her out to lunch," he said, and smiled that wistful smile again. "She misses me. She said she doesn't like sleeping alone." It was a shock. Okay, I knew she didn't like to sleep alone. On those nights when Tony wasn't around, didn't Jeff the Jaguar, my buddy Mike, and Pilot Pete crawl into her bed to comfort her in his absence? I really wanted to say something, but the sensible Andrea intervened and said that it was actually none of my business. I took a deep breath to calm my angry inner thoughts. "Well, you bring her something tasty for lunch," I said. "She'll get tired." The new year had begun, and other than a quick maid and soon-to-be finished creaking from above, I rarely saw or heard from Tony or Louise. Over one of our regular cups of coffee, Jane told me that Anna had been a bit of a pain in her ass, complaining about almost everything she and Rick tried to do. Anna was working early. Could they please turn off the TV? Their kitchens were next to each other. Did Jane really have to be clanging pots and pans so loudly that she could hear every beep from the microwave? "Honestly," she said, "I think that arrogant bitch must have been raised in a monastery under a vow of silence." I took a sip of coffee. "If she's not in bed," I said, "my bed is right under hers, and sometimes she makes a little noise." "Is this with Tony?" she said, getting a little sassy. "Most of the time." "Yes," she said, taking the cookies I had specially baked. "I noticed different cars at Tony's house. And that's not the only Tony spot they've taken." "Tell." I explained that Tony told me they were getting quite serious, but I could hear a change in the creaking to determine which pilot she got it from. Jane admitted that she had taken photos of the strange cars in our parking lot and sent them to the management company as instructed, but in fact she could only name the cars, not their drivers, so my information was new to her. The house was quiet and Louise was back on her regular long-distance voyages across the Atlantic, and I only knew she was there when there was a creaking noise above me. I talked to Tony from time to time, and one day I asked him when he was going to put his apartment on the market. "Oh no," he said, shaking his head. Anne Louise still thinks we should keep our places. Are you still paying her to live there? Well, gas and electricity. Food? Well, I'll have to buy food where I live, won't I? Yes, I suppose, I said, but I thought to myself, no, when you came and spent Saturday night and Sunday morning with me, you didn't do that. I noticed that he no longer goes out on Fridays and Saturdays and mentioned it. I'll calm down in my old age, he said. And it's not that you don't have any more money. A little, he said, as if nothing had happened. Just be careful, Tony, okay? I said, looking at our car park, happy that Anne Louise's car was with her at Heathrow. If she can't afford to live in her apartment without extracting money from you. Tony rolled his eyes. It's not like that, he said. Anna and I, he began again. Anna Louise and I are in love. What? Yes, he said with a soft smile that I had never seen from him. A first for me. He paused. I mean, when we were... Yes, Tony, we were special. I remember you telling me. But it felt like I was just sex and free food for you on the weekend. Perhaps I should have charged you for rent and food. Don't be like that, he said. You and I, we were different. We were. He struggled to find a comparison, even though I had already told him special. Like I said, sex on the weekends and free food, Tony, that's what I was to you. The reason you never had to go grocery shopping. I'm really sorry, he said slowly. Are you sorry? I intervened. What? Sorry for leaving me when the fashion model arrived. No, he managed to choke out. I'm so sorry. That's how you feel. So you don't regret leaving me? Look, I didn't abandon you. He made exclamation marks with 2 fingers in the air. We were never together, were we? No, Tony, I said with a deep sigh. After spending the better part of a year in bed together, we certainly weren't together, were we? I opened the front door, and Anna Louise is in love with you. Yeah, he gave me a confident smile. But don't want you to move in with us forever. Not yet. But are you together? It's my turn to put exclamation points. He nodded. Exclusive. Yes, he said, as if it were some kind of divine revelation to him. Oh, okay, I said, nodding widely. I was so close to telling him about the other guys. Tony, be careful, okay? What do you mean? He snapped at me. He was happy. Did I really want to tell him about the 3 pilots? Ruin the happy place he was in? Nothing, buddy, absolutely nothing. I left. Perhaps Anne Louise would start a new life and stop having fun with her buddies when he had a few nights away. I still had the photos and registration numbers of the cars, and I could remember their names using my own shorthand. One spring early Saturday morning, I watched Tony being picked up from the front door in one of his football club's mini buses, and I remembered him telling me that they had qualified for the Cup, and it was a late match in a real stadium, in the countryside, with an overnight stay at the Premier Inn or local bed and breakfasts as a sign of celebration or condolence. I thought about that. There was no sign of Anne Louise or her car, and I thought I heard her drive away early in the morning. I went to work and spent a quiet Saturday collecting a few euros for one client, dollars for another, and brochures for a couple of elderly passers-by interested in the Orient Express all the way to Venice for their golden wedding anniversary. I saw them walking through our little property, 50 years together and still holding hands. This was what I wanted. I returned home and pulled out onto the road to see a dark Ford Transit toned fitness on the road, in traffic, and a black Range Rover again in the second bay. Anne Louise was in love with Tony, wasn't she? If so, why is it Pilot Pete's turn again? I didn't know for sure, but a few minutes spent in my apartment let me know that they probably weren't surfing the internet or watching TV. Again, the creaking was the longest ever, but its volume did not increase in any way, but the actual level of her grunts, moans, and exclamations increased exponentially. Her final, "Oh, Pete," was worthy of a dozen Harlequin novels. Jaguar Jeff and My Buddy Mike were very good. lasting much longer than her regular guest, but neither of them received anything close to the applause and encore shouts that Pilot Pete did. He may have become Tony's regular replacement. I was still very angry, though. And Louise took advantage of a handsome guy who may not have been the sharpest pencil in the box, and, let's be honest, slept with him for rent money. Just as I was getting ready to go to the cinema, the doorbell rang, the top one of the four. I was hoping it would be Tony, back early from the match and struggling to find his keys in the pouring rain that started an hour ago. I ran out in my overalls, opened the door to see Delivers dangerously dragging his blue plastic moped around Tony's poorly parked dark van, their wet waterproofs glistening against the fluorescence of the streetlights. Looking down at our welcome mat, I saw a brown paper Burger King bag slowly falling apart as the rain pelted it. I left him there, closed the door, and went back to the movie, wishing I had stolen the tall cups, one of which might have had a milkshake in it. Oh, good. Back on the couch, I thought about contacting Tony and telling him to come home immediately because I could hear moaning coming from upstairs and his true love might be unhealthy. No, we still can't do it. The next day, Karma returned home, or rather Tony. While his usual drunken colleagues the night before were either sleeping off their team's draw or finishing the last of their cooked breakfast, Tony's minibus full of older, more sensible fans who had gone to bed early and needed help returning home to mow the lawn, finishing the bathroom plumbing, decorating the living room, or doing anything equally mature and sensible, he was tossed around. I looked out of the kitchen window while waiting for the kettle to boil and saw a rather confused and exhausted Tony standing in the road with a small backpack, looking at his van, scratching his head and wondering why it wasn't where he left it 26 hours ago. This could finally be it, I thought to myself, and pulled my mug of tea out of the farthest kitchen window to see what was going on, as Tony was now examining Pilot Pete's black Range Rover, which was really only visible from his kitchen window. I took the mug into the bedroom, opened the high window for greater effect, and listened with intrigue. In the silence, I texted Jane, asking her to look out of the living room window and see who had returned first. It was too early in the morning for Jane and Rick, but I knew she'd be mad if she missed out on the fun. I heard the front door open and ran to look through the peephole of my front door to where Tony was opening the front door. I could see him rushing through the small table in the hallway and the wooden bowl where he always left the keys to his van and not finding them. Then he went out and went up the stairs. I ran back to my bedroom and listened. There was a distant ringing of the doorbell, a ring and the rattling of a knob, but he obviously still didn't have her key. Standing on the bed, I heard her voice. "Crap, this is my boyfriend, Tony. Get up, go lie down on the sofa and pretend to be asleep. Put on your damn clothes first. Take these blankets." "Boy," I heard a deep male voice. The tapping of feet on the floor told me that Pilot Pete was probably following instructions and was probably pulling something as well. I ran back to the front door, my pulse racing, desperate to finally hear this bitch get her comeuppance. I opened it slightly, closed my eyes, and listened. "Hi, Tony," she sighed loudly, stronger than ever before, and, as I guessed, hugged him. "You're back early." "Yeah," I heard him say. "My van isn't in my parking spot. You know, anything inside isn't covered by my overnight insurance unless it's in my bay and covered by my CCTV system, is not it?" "Well," she muttered. "Who owns the Range Rover?" "Oh," she said, panicking in her voice. "This is my friend, Pete. He was the pilot of my flight last night and couldn't make it back to Southampton." She continued her story. "I said he could crash on my couch." "Yes, and you moved my van out of my driveway so you could park his car in it. Thank you." "Tony," she whined, "don't. I'll have to erase the CCTV from yesterday if the insurance company finds out that this wasn't the case." "Cameras?" she stuttered. "Yes, it covers the entire parking lot, recording to the hard drive in my bedroom. Thanks to this, We can all benefit from lower insurance premiums." Her voice changed from a concerned scarlet woman to an angry consumer. "You never told me," she snapped. "What? You never told me I could get cheaper car insurance." "No." He regained some of the lost momentum. "That's because you don't renew your policy until August. So, Range Rover." "How? How much cheaper?" she said, the financial side of her brain pushing her infidelity to the background. "Whose Range Rover is this?" he snapped. Her tone said that he had never dared to talk to her like that before. "It's my friend Pete. I told you so." She paused. "You're still fucking drunk. I can smell the booze from here. I'm not ready to discuss this with you right now. Go to your apartment and sleep in your bed." Damn, but she was good. I had to give her at least a BAFTA nomination for this performance. "Where are the keys to my van?" "Are they around here somewhere, Tony?" The angry fitness instructor apparently stormed Anne Louise's apartment. "Tony, I'm so sorry." It was Pilot Pete. I closed the front door and walked into the living room to hear muffled conversation upstairs. He went on to talk about his Range Rover being a Ultra Finch with a V8 engine and upgrades valued at around pound 200,000, and the owners' club said they were stolen to order, placed in containers and shipped to Eastern Europe. He had no way to get home to his nice, secure garage because he had an early flight in an hour. I heard Tony agree with him that it was probably a safer place. I wanted to scream, but you and that bitch didn't know it was video surveillance. And, more importantly, you spent most of Saturday having sex with her. My phone beeped and I looked at the screen. "Thanks, babe. I couldn't miss it. But apparently she can get away with it anyway." I replied that she was right, and should I interfere? "Leave it to me," she answered. Back in my kitchen, Pilot Pete pulled out of our parking lot, waving to Tony, giving his girlfriend a possessive hug. A few moments later, he was driving his van back to his place, grumbling that the damn thing didn't even come close to the curb. It was easy. After listening to her and Pilot Pete the night before, she had other things on her mind that outweighed efficient parallel parking. Suddenly, Rick appeared with his large DSLR camera that he used for his media and advertising business. "Oh shit," said the professional photographer. "Your boys are gone. I missed him again. Damn it." Anne Louise turned to face him. Her face was ashen. What?" he said. "This car. You know it's the Overfinch Holland and Holland Special Edition. If your boyfriend still has the same guns in the safe in the back, it's worth over £250,000. Anna, maybe more." Tony looked confused for a moment, and Anne Louise just watched. So Rick continued, "Damn, this is the guy you want. When was that truck last here? Ooh, when was that?" He looked at the flying Jezebel. "February? I told Janie that, judging by the car he drove. Did you choose a good car there, Master Anna?" As my father said, there is always a place for an entrepreneur, but there is no substitute for rich parents. When will he come back again? No one moved. Can you give him my business card? I'd really like to take a picture of this truck." Anne Louise silently took Rick's card and stared into space, while Tony still looked confused, occasionally pointing in the direction where Pilot Pete had gone. "I know you'll be very busy with other things, honey, judging by the way you two looked at each other when you came back from dinner last night. But please give him my card. Anna?" "Yes," she said. "I'll give him your business card, damn it." "Sorry," Rick said, finally realizing that he might have said the wrong thing. He backed away and walked through the front door, which was still hanging open from his hasty entrance onto the stage. At the imaginary BAFTA awards flashing through my head, Anne Louise's "Go sleep in your room" monologue seemed to guarantee a prize. But when the lights came up and an elderly sitcom actor said, "And the best actor in a drama says, sound of torn envelope Rick for the composition, This Lying Bitch and Superfinch from Flat 1 to 4 Productions," I mentally cheered up and made a note to invite my lovely upstairs neighbors over for dinner again. "What?" said Tony. Tony, she said, baby, it's not like that. Not like that at all. There was a knock on my door and I, still in my pajamas and robe, slowly walked up to her. Hey, Tony, I said, adding, did you win? With all possible innocence. Of course, it's not an imaginary BAFTA win, but it was still an honor to be nominated. I decided to work on my performance a little more, so I walked straight out to the front door, taking the spot where Rick had just given up. And Louise, he muttered, she. What does she have? Men in her apartment. Yes, several. A little, I raised 3 fingers, and you knew? I looked at Anne Louise. None of my business partners, I said with as wide a smile as I could manage. But I told you that we have something going on, he said. You knew I loved her. Tony, we need to talk about this, Anne Louise said. Talk about what? He responded sharply. The fact that we almost live together, but you entertain different men whenever I'm not around. Tony, can we please continue this discussion inside? Why? Andy seems to know what's going on. Well, Andrea should mind her own business, Anna Louise shouted to me. Like I said, Anna, it's none of my business. But my bedroom is right below yours, and not to make a big deal about it. Your bed creaks. I know what cars are allowed in our parking lot, and I noticed when Tony's van was brought out onto the road. The fact that I left for work at the same time as your pilots. Pilots, Tony snapped, as if their work was only making the situation worse. Damn pilots. A noise in front of our house made Jane look to see what was going on. No, I think you've pretty much got it figured out, Jane smiled. And the We Hate Anne Louise Club? Do you know who started this? She looked from me to Jane. I think I know, she said. You really liked it, Jane said. You came here to one of the calmest people I have ever been friends with, and immediately made us understand that you are the most important, and we will have to live by your rules, even 4,000 miles away. You might as well write the first series of minutes, baby. Oh, fuck you, said Anna Louise. Only because I wouldn't join your little happy family. She said the last word in a whiny voice. Simply because I didn't want to live in your pocket like she did. And then there's Tony, I said. Yeah, his tongue stuck out when you showed up and you decided you were going to take advantage of it. His company, oh no, Anne Louise is here, and it has to be about her. I think it was Tony's decision, she replied, crossing her arms defensively and ending with a triumphant smile. Yeah, after all, nothing happened between us, did it, Tony? We weren't together, per se. Tony looked at me, his absolute misery. Well, it turns out that neither you nor Anna. But we didn't, she snapped. We just. He just paid you to sleep in your bed and have sex with you, I said. How dare you, she howled. At this squeal, Rick appeared with a mug in his hand. Did he have to pay you to sleep over at your place? He said with a grin. I saw him going through his wallet when he left. Well, I wasn't going to spend the night with him. The place looks like a pigsty. Okay, it was a bachelor pad, but Tony was a bit of a clean freak, and the place was spotless thanks to his cleaning lady. But he had to pay you. Rick repeated, and you had sex? Well, if he lives in my apartment, then he must pay for its maintenance. Not like you, she pointed her finger at me. He told me that you are so desperate that you will feed him and let him have sex with you. God, you're so stupid. Suddenly Jane found herself in front of Anne Louise's face, inches away. Enough, shut your mouth, shouted the usually calm Jane, angry that the blonde was currently losing her temper so spectacularly. Twist your neck before I break it. I'm really sorry I got into an argument with your boyfriend. She opened her mouth to argue. Okay, the man who paid to sleep in your bed. We only did it once or twice a month. But it stopped the day you arrived. He idolized the ground you walked on and seemed willing to believe that you both would live happily ever after because he didn't know about all the other aircrew you partied with when he wasn't around. We now had an audience of 2 police officers and an elderly neighbor who had called them. Rick stepped forward. "Sorry, officers," he said, waving his arms widely. "It's just a little tiff with the neighbors. We'll all head back to our property at once, and I promise nothing like this will ever happen again. I'll need a few names and addresses in case you understand." "Of course," he said. "You will come there with me, my wife, and our neighbor Andy." "Come with us, Andy," said Jane. "Leave this psycho to his fate. She can explain to Tony what she was doing with other guys when his back was turned. It was actually his fault." She took my hand and almost forcibly led me into the hall and up the stairs. The policeman wrote down our names, addresses, and dates of birth. Then Rick outlined the background to the fight he probably started. Fair play, he stopped it too. The police officer wrote something down and shook his head. Her colleague was getting similar information from Louise and Tony, and from her body language and facial expressions as she walked to their car. She too was annoyed by the blonde stewardess and her exclamations about the neighbors. 2 days later, I parked my car and didn't expect anything. Louise's Mini was not there. However, in the corridor, everything was different. At the top of the stairs, there was an old lady and a gentleman who were quite loudly, but quite sensibly discussing the issue of the upstairs landing with Rick and Jane. I heard Jane say, "And Andy, I think Anna mentioned her." I stopped and looked up. "I'll go, Mom," said a taller man, whom I hadn't noticed, and came down the stairs towards me. He stopped a few steps away from me and smiled. It had something of Louise's dark skin, but not of her blonde dyed hair. He was dark brown and had eyebrows of the same color that formed a perfect line on his handsome face. I burst out of my gratitude. Obviously, he didn't. "Hi," he said with a very sincere smile. "I'm Rob, Anna's sister." "Brother," I corrected it. "Sorry," he grinned, showing perfect straight white teeth. "I'm Rob. Anna is my sister." "Hi, Rob," I smiled back at him. "I'm Andrea, Anna's downstairs neighbor." I paused for a moment and just looked at him. It's complicated. And so it was. Why does that damn woman above have such an attractive brother? I checked my left hand. There are no rings. "That's usually the case," he said. "Can we, talk? How about some coffee? I just finished work and need to take off my shoes." I opened the front door and walked in, glad he followed me. "Thank you," he said. "Mom, I'll just be here and knock when you're done." He entered my large kitchen dining room, where I was already filling the kettle. Decaf or regular, I picked up both containers. The regular one was a really nice, expensive instant one that I saved for special occasions or for special friends. "Oh, please, as usual," he said approvingly. I took 2 of my nicer mugs from the closet and poured granules into them. "What did you want to talk about?" "Anna," he said. "Okay," I looked at him expectantly, holding a teaspoon over a jar of coffee. He chuckled and closed his eyes, and I chuckled in response. "Sorry, I'm really not that good at this." He smiled again, and it looked perfect. What am I talking about? Everything about him looked perfect. Even better when he took off his short jacket, and the definition of his muscles was visible under his tight gray polo shirt with the word Fred Perry written on it. "Are you here to scold me, Mr. Gray?" I said with a laugh, my thoughts going back to reading 50 Shades. I don't know if my rude thoughts showed on my face. I poured boiling water into the mugs to relieve the tension. "Milk and sugar." "Please," he said simply, his mouth still curled into a smirk. I did so, turning slightly so he could see my ass in that short uniform skirt, now fully visible after I took off my jacket. I wanted to open the button on my shirt to show more flesh and a little of my ample cleavage, but that would be a little obvious. Shocked at my wantonness, I poured some milk into and around both mugs and blotted it apologetically with kitchen paper before putting a spoonful of sugar in mine and handed him the sugar bowl and spoon, and he did the same. I turned to face him. "So Anna," I said. "Anna," he replied. It was still very quiet. I took my coffee mug. I'm so sorry, he said. But she called Mom. That's her on the balcony with my dad, talking to your neighbors. Mom decided she wanted to fly here to help, only to find that the drama queen is somewhere between here and Dulles. This is Anna, I said. He looked at me and closed his eyes. Anna can be difficult. Yes, I said. Come and sit down. Let's make this as comfortable as possible. Certainly. We walked into my large living room, and I took one end of the large sofa, and he took the other. I turned to face him, raising my knees. Obviously, it was my turn. She didn't seem like she wanted to make any friends, except, of course, my downstairs neighbor. You were together. Before, he paused to let me finish. We had something, I said. To be honest, it was very casual, and we were both kind of okay with it at the time. If Anna hadn't arrived, we probably would have just stopped. I paused. Did I really want to tell this gorgeous man about the last time I had sex? From the sound of it, he still understood, so I continued. It was nice, but we would probably just get bored and stop seeing each other. And Anna started dating him. The day after she arrived, I realized I was definitely yesterday's girl, and she was the new of the month. I mean, all you have to do is look at her. She's gorgeous. Are you not? I blushed and lowered my eyes. What a cool man I dealt with. I'm not bad, I said, still feeling the heat on my cheeks. But I decided to work in travel agencies rather than as a flight attendant. I don't do glamour. You don't have to, he said, sipping his coffee and smiling at me. Believe me. Are you really here to talk to me about your sister, Mr. Gray? Rob, please, Andrea. Then you can call me Andy. Okay? Andy, he smiled again. And I saw that he was forcing himself to turn the conversation back to his sister. Did you quarrel? Yes, after 7 or 8 months of spoiling one. Why? We're quite a close-knit bunch here, even old Mr. Hannigan, who lived in Anna's apartment before her. We invited her to our Christmas open day for coffee, but she was always too busy. Then she finally blamed us for the noise. She almost always doesn't like anything, he smiled. She's my sister, and there are days when I can't. I'm sorry, I fucking can't stand her. He turned his right knee onto the sofa and, getting comfortable, leaned forward a little more, as I did. I gently squeezed my breasts with my hands to lift them up and see his gaze. Now he was closer. He continued, Take my job, for example, he said, sipping his coffee. Your job? I am a doctor. I am from before raised his eyebrows in free surprise. An excellent doctor. My parents would have loved him. An orthopedic surgeon, no less. Wow, I said, letting him know that I was really impressed. But to hear her tell it, since I don't fly on or near jet, I might as well be flipping burgers at McDonald's. I giggled. Yes, I said, you can believe it. I sell travel packages and places that allow her to work. And she looked at me like I was a cleaning lady. So fighting with her won't be that difficult. This other guy. Tony. Tony, never met him. Was he her crush? Among other things, he closed his eyes and rubbed them with his thumb and forefinger. I'm not sure it was love, but I think we were all annoyed by her making big eyes and talking and charging him $10 for a place to stay in her apartment and, how should I put it, letting him, let's say, take advantage. My bed is right under hers. He chuckled. She charged him. Rent. Yes, she insisted that if he was going to stay at her house, he should contribute. I'm pretty sure everything else was free. Did he stay there every night? That's what I heard. And you've probably heard it all. He sat down and finished his coffee, and then? She was giving Tony a hard time. In addition to charging him rent, she forced him to buy takeout and then buy her groceries on the way home as she flew all over the world. He closed his eyes again. And I suppose she wasn't exceptional. No, there was Jeff the Jaguar, my buddy Mike and Pilot Pete in an over something or another Range Rover. Superfinch, Pete Conroy? I shrugged my shoulders. I only heard her call him Pete, quite loudly though. He smirked but continued. A dark-haired guy, my age, with a Kirk Douglas-like cleft in his chin. He touched his nicely shaved chin, and I instantly remembered it on the other guy and nodded. And a shiny Range Rover that costs more than mine. House. So Rick upstairs told me, by the way, on the day everything went wrong, I felt I should add, he came twice. I realized my Freudian slip. Well, he stayed overnight twice, if you catch my drift. I smiled and winced at the same time. I got it, he said. Pete is an old friend of the family, and they've been pretending there's nothing between them for years. Well, there wasn't much talking between them last Saturday and Sunday. They were very close and spoke quite loudly. In fact, 2 or 3 times. I giggled again. I hoped that by being humorous, I made the discussion of his sister's sex life less terrible than it would normally be. Well, at least Mom will be pleased to know that it all started with Anna dating young Peter Conroy. She went to school with his mother, and I have a feeling they both took their younger children out of kindergarten. It worked, I said with a grin. He paused. I was going to say, Mom will be happy when I tell her, but, maybe I'll have to change the description of the circumstances. Well, getting to the point, Anna moved Tony's van full of expensive equipment from our secure driveway to Pilot, so Pete could park his. Over Finch, Rob nodded. Instead, Tony got home earlier than expected and Pete and Anna were still close, so things got complicated. Anna lied to poor old Tony, and between me, Rick and Jane, we sort of broke the news to him after Pete left, of course. Thank you. Mom will be pleased to know that he didn't get a black eye for this. Tony is a fitness trainer, and he's also a karate instructor, so. Then again, I might as well not tell my mom about this. So that was the sad story of Sunday, I said, feeling a little sad that my charming conversation with the charming man was coming to an end. Thank you so much for your openness, Andy. Please believe me, I actually imagined the story to be much like how you described it. My sister tends to, well, add her own interpretation to complex incidents that happen to her. Things go like this. Never her fault. But charging a guy rent when he's not even a guy is fucking new, even for her, and moving on to someone else. 3 others, I intervened. Oh God, don't remind me. Thanks again, Andy, really, and sorry for all the chaos she caused. You're welcome, Rob, I said. Crap. Damn. He was about to get up. I thought quickly. Can I refresh your coffee? No, he said. Damn again. But, he added cheerfully, how about I buy you a coffee tomorrow afternoon? Judging by your form, your agency is located in the city center, isn't it? Yeah, I said, not hiding my beaming smile. Tomorrow morning, I will replace a couple of hips. At least one needs to be done and dusted. Meet me at Coffee Republic. It was 4 stores from mine. Perfect. Give me your number so I can call you if I can leave early. I gave him the number and he dialed it. I saved the missed call as Dr. Rob, and he saved mine as Andy. At the perfect time, there was a knock on the door, and it sounded like Jane, so I stood up and led the gorgeous doctor back to the front door and opened it to reveal Jane hugging Rob and Anna's mom and Rick shaking hands with their dad. At any time, Mrs. Gray, Jane said, one of us will usually be around, and we will keep an unobtrusive eye on Anna and let you know if anything happens. She will be okay. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Rick, she said. Rob turned to me, took my hand and kissed it. And thank you, Andy, he said kindly. Mom, although this has all been a little worrying, I have news you'll be pleased to hear. Seriously, she said with some disbelief. I wasn't sure how sensitive Jane's description would be. I hoped it would be more gentle than mine towards her son. We have to go. We've already taken up so much of your time, Dad said, and Robert will have a long day tomorrow. Surgeon, his mother said with obvious pride, and Jane responded with obvious pleasure. There was a farewell, the main front door opened, and we saw Anna's family walking down the driveway towards a large BMW X5, which I guessed belonged to Robert, and we waved them off. "What nice people," Rick said. "How could they have a cow like that for a daughter?" "Although that son is quite a nice sight," Jane said. "He was making big eyes at you, baby." Of course he said I was gorgeous. I brushed my hair back with my hand. At least that's what he told me. "Andrea," Jane hissed as we returned to our warmer hallway. "He'll have a chance to tell me again when he buys me coffee tomorrow afternoon." I paused for effect. "After he's had his hip surgery, of course." "Oh, kids," she exploded. "Are we talking about coffee leading to something else? Lunch, dinner, wild sex in the back of that shiny BMW? Who knows, Jane?" I said. "Who knows?" I slept well, dreaming of meeting the hot doctor at a nearby cafe, disturbed by thoughts of his sister bursting in and both of them screaming, swearing at me and calling me names. I woke up early, showered, styled my hair the way I liked it, and packed a large bag with my best makeup ready to apply closer to my appointment time, followed by my favorite perfume. I picked out some nice underwear, well, my favorite style, at least a white bra for going out, and I played around with the buttons, working on how much skin I could show once I got out of my agency and could take mine off silk signature neck scarf. The girls in the department noticed my nervousness, and I explained what was happening. That was enough, and when the clock struck 12, the store door was locked and the closed sign temporarily hung, while Teresa and Emmy took my bag and applied foundation, blush, and all the other magical products I had brought with me. Yourself. Teresa ripped off my scarf and unbuttoned my blouse, where I had tried this morning, and declared that everything was fine, and then I sprayed perfume on me. Looking at myself in the mirror, I was very pleased with the result. A few seconds later, the phone rang. "Hi, Andy." It was Dr. Rob. "I'm near your store, and you're there, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, showing Teresa the name on the phone. "Training using a new system," Emmy whispered in my ear. "I'm just finishing up training on a new computer system. I'll be right there." Emmy and Teresa looked like a couple of excited schoolgirls and practically screamed at me. As one, we calmed down, opened the door to the store, and walked out calmly and at ease. Teresa flipped the closed sign to open and unlock. "See you after lunch, Andy," she said, holding the door open while eyeing Dr. Rob closely. When we left, I was sure that I heard two identical, but short cries of delight behind me. "It must be a really exciting time in the travel agent world, Andy," he said, looking over his shoulder at the grinning faces of my two colleagues, holding back his emotions now that he was watching. "Oh, like you wouldn't believe it, Rob," I said, poorly hiding my laugh. They both seemed quiet. "Possessive, Andy," he said, looking down at me. "Should I be on my best behavior?" I looked back at my two friends, who were still watching with a wide smile and interest. "Yes and no," I said, waving back at them, all pretense of normalcy gone. "Imogen, the little blonde, will take one of your eyes if you upset me, and Teresa, the gorgeous brunette, will want to know when our first date." "Oh, that's easy," he said. "Tonight?" I sort of made up my mind and booked a table at Francois's Cafe in the port. "Will I pick you up at 7? My face turned red again. "We haven't even reached the cafe yet." "That would be great," I said. "Thank you." We found a table outside in the spring sunshine, and Rob rushed over for a coffee and 2 paninis which, thanks to my morning appetite overwhelming my nerves, I had to stop, my hunger returning now that I knew I had a date that evening. We talked about ourselves, the usual initial compatibility stuff you always go through. It was wonderful, and I really liked him. He was kind, charming, and the complete opposite of his sister. After an hour of gentle conversation and confirming body language, I took his hand and he led me back into the store, holding the door for me. "Ladies," he said, and they both grinned like idiots. If that's okay, I'll take Andy to Café Francois on the dock tonight at 7 o'clock. I will be wearing smart casual clothes. I'll leave you to discuss what Andy should wear. Whatever answer he was waiting for, Teresa stood up and with narrowed eyes, a half-pouting half-smile, added, "Define smart casual," she said. "Do you wear slacks or dark jeans? A shirt, of course, but a sweater or jacket?" "Black jeans," he said back to her. "A slightly faded gray shirt and a light jacket, in case it gets cold and Andy needs it to wrap around his shoulders." I thought I would explode, but Teresa immediately responded. "Great," she said. "Leave it to us." Until then, he smiled and bowed, and to make the final move, he blew a kiss. We were all practically screaming about this place. "Andrea Davis, you're a bad girl," Emmy shouted as Rob walked towards General Hospital, his laughter evident. "Baby," Teresa said, "little black dress. I know you have at least 3. "Yes," said Emmy, "the same shiny one that is here." She pointed to the low neckline of my favorite girl's dress and where it ended on me. "Read my mind, ladies," I said, finally starting to calm down from all the excitement and the realization that I was going on my first date in a very long time. Emmy ate lunch next, returning with food from McDonald's and news that she had been talking to her brother's friend Debs, the hairdresser further into town, and I was the last customer at 5 o'clock. Debs made my hair look amazing, and I went home absolutely delighted. I showered below my shoulders and repeated my makeup as I had done that morning. I was standing at the kitchen window, trying my best not to bite my painted lower lip, when the X5 pulled up at the end of the driveway. I closed the door, went out into the corridor, looked around again, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, opened them and the front door and went out. "Wow, Andy," Rob said halfway through. I got a little twisted. "It's kind of a team effort," I said. "Though we all agreed on this dress." I ran my hands down the sides of my chest from the cleavage to mid-thigh, "probably before you went back to work." "You look amazing, Andy," he said. "Wow, and last night you said you weren't into glamour." Our table at Café Francois overlooked a repurposed commercial port that had been part of my city since the Industrial Revolution, but had been converted into luxury apartments and a high-end shopping park. The waiters were attentive, chatty, very complimentary of our appearance, especially me, and even more delighted when I ordered in almost perfect French, having learned the language to an excellent level at school and using it extensively in my work. The food was equally delicious, and we continued our pleasant chat during lunch. I talked about my family, my parents, my sister and brother-in-law, and my niece. We moved to a safe travel zone, and he asked me about the best places in the world. He was a big fan of the States and traveled there for work, but I said I was more interested in Europe. I said that I could spend the whole summer on the Divine Coast, Capri and Ischia, and still want to come back. He said he had been to Rome, so I told him about the Bay of Naples and its surroundings. It was then the Rhineland, since his father was a military doctor and knew Cologne, Dusseldorf, Mönchengladbach, Herford, and similar places. I suggested Worms and the Rhineland up to the Black Forest. He smiled at me again. "You say this is very interesting. I already have some passion for travel. Would you be a guide?" I blushed again. I took another sip of wine and smiled at him. "Any time," I said. And I really meant it. It was a school day, which meant we both had work to do in the morning. We left the restaurant with bows and smiles, and I spoke some more French to the staff about how excellent the food was and how charming they all were. The head waiter was so happy that he kissed me on the cheek and apologized to Rob in French, and I translated for him. We left. They drove me home, and Rob walked me to the front door. "Would you like to stop by for a coffee before you go home? I'm sure I'll see you safe at home, but unfortunately, as much as I desperately want it, I can't drink any more coffee," he grinned, taking my hand and leading me out into the hallway. "I need to be at work." "At 7 o'clock," I saw disappointment on his face. I have to admit one thing, Andy, he said quietly. I was so jealous when the waiter kissed you. Well, I can certainly help, I said, moving closer to him and wrapping my arms around his neck. I moved my face to his, and we kissed. I've been wanting to do this since we sat on your couch last night, he said, placing his hand on my waist and the other on the small of my back. Glad I could help. I've wanted to kiss you ever since I threw that 50 Shades quote at you. Well, at least we got that out of the way, he kissed me again. I would really like to see you again and very soon. I'll be the surgeon on duty tomorrow night and the next night. But as of Friday night, I'm all yours. Okay, I said. I think you should come here and let me cook you dinner. Also a chef. Andy, is there anything you can't do? I don't know, I kissed him again. Maybe we should try something and see. I'll come here straight from work, he said. It'll be around 6. I'll make sure the coffee is ready. I'll look forward to it, he said, and we started kissing each other again. I started to feel a little dizzy when I heard a scream. Robert. We stopped and I retreated to my door, but she ran down the steps to get a better view. The infrared switches turning on the lights. I thought it was your car. What? She obviously saw us in our nice clothes and noticed that we were hugging each other from above. We parted, and in a new light, I saw that he had my lipstick on his lips. I quickly wiped it away with my finger. Good evening, Anna, he said, turning around. Good evening, Rob. She paused, dressed in gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that showed off her flat stomach. She looked again, then crossed her arms and glared at me. Hello, Anne Louise, I added. What are you doing to her? She squealed. What do you care? He said in response. She spat. Her and her others. She nodded towards Rick and Jane's apartment. They were pestering me. Really? Well, from what I heard, you haven't done that well yourself, Anna, and you're charging the guy rent. Oh, she muttered, obviously gathering her thoughts. Oh, she already told you about that? Well, that's typical. She crossed her arms in disgust. Well, I bid you good night. Andy, he leaned over and kissed me again, and I heard a furious snort from the middle of the stairs. Good night, Anna. What? She growled. You sleep with the enemy and wish me good night. First date is, Rob said, trying to calm his sister down as he gave up and walked out the front door. You, she pointed her index finger at me, stay the hell away from my brother. Yes, I said, watching as her brother waved at me from the side of the road as he got into his car. You keep wanting it. I closed the door, but a few moments later I heard her screaming in the bedroom. He just wants to seduce you, Andrea. Just sex. Because that's all any man ever wants from you. What the hell does he want with an ugly old woman like you? He'll seduce you and then dump you like they all do. Like every guy dumps you because you deserve it. He will seduce you and then throw you out in revenge. For me and for what you did to me. The next morning, there was a note on the mailbox in the hallway with a very angry message. You won't see my brother. Bitch. I saw her brother, of course. We corresponded via text messages, and 2 days later, I saw him sitting on the wall of my front garden as I pulled the car into a parking space, and I was even happier to see that his sister's car was gone. No matter how hard I tried to be a little cool when I saw him, I couldn't help myself, and my cheeks hurt when he picked me up, kissed me, and apologized for Anna's screams and threats after our first date. He told me about his long day, how he had 3 surgeries and never sat down. I instantly pushed him onto one of the chairs at the dining table. You just call her Anna, I said with a grin and poured boiling water into 2 mugs. Oh, don't get me started. He put his hand to his face. In middle school, she was a pretty girl who found herself in a class with a lot of pretty girls and decided she needed something to help her get through. Anne Louise Gray became Anne Louise Gray, and the whole class would have screamed if anyone had said otherwise. And you are Dr. Gray, not Dr. Tyrwhitt Gray? Tyrwhitt was my mother's maiden name, and she was the very last in her line, so Anne decided she would become Tyrwhitt Gray. With an A, I added, stirring the coffee and the atmosphere. Really, Andy, with an A, he answered me with a smile, taking the coffee from me. So will she be three-barreled when she gets married? I'll wait until she gets married and see. I pursed my lips and smiled. I came closer to him. And she told you not to come near me? Not quite in pain of death, but close enough. Any number of missed calls, a few messages on the answering machine that get louder and nastier, and then a bunch of letters to my mom about you, with my copies. He took a sip of coffee and took my hand, pulling me closer. It seems like I need to stay away from you. I placed my coffee cup on the table next to him and, despite my short skirt, climbed onto his lap, wrapping my arms around his neck. And there's nothing I can do to make you change your mind. I started kissing his face, cheek, neck. He hugged me and kissed me back. I'm sure there could be something. He wrapped his long, muscular arms around me and held me tightly to him, something few of my boyfriends had ever done before. Yees, I sighed. I felt his hands around me, pulling my blouse out of the rumpled back of my skirt to touch the bare skin at the base of my spine. I shuddered, but pleasantly. It's not that I want to annoy her, he whispered. It's just that you're such a wonderful girl, and I think about you all the time, and... He hugged me tightly, and we Frenched each other's faces, just enjoying our close contact. Well, if my lovemaking with you also pisses off Princess Anne Louise, then, well, it's certainly a win-win. I slid off his lap and pulled him into my bedroom where he could continue undressing me. He sat down and stood me in front of him, found the button and zipper on the back of my skirt and undid both. I jerked and she fell. He then pulled me a little closer and unbuttoned my blouse, which he pulled down by the sleeves. Then it was my turn, and I unbuttoned his shirt, sliding my fingers under the fabric and gently rubbing the hair on his chest. I love hairy chests. I loved kissing and cuddling, but Tony wasn't such a big fan. I think it was too serious and complex for him and involved a lot more than he was prepared to take on. But Rob was as interested in it as I was and obviously enjoyed it. Or so it seemed. I remembered Anne Louise's cries that her brother would not be interested in an old woman like me, and that whatever he did was probably just an attempt to take revenge for my nasty attitude towards her, his beloved sister. Okay, he can do this and leave. If he could just walk away from a naked woman with such brutality, my disappointment would eventually give way to a certain amount of respect. Wow, Andy, he said, leaning on his elbows and brushing my bangs from my forehead with his hands. Baby, that was amazing. Working together, Rob, I said with a chuckle, definitely working together. I pulled his face towards mine and kissed him. It was the best. Ever, seriously, you were amazing, Rob, thank you. I mean, Andy, he said with a tired grin. Anytime, absolutely anytime. This was the first time, and there were many more. Every evening Rob came to me, and the next day I came to him. I had a spacious one-bedroom ground-floor apartment that I was awfully proud of, and Rob had a semi-detached suburban home overlooking the park, 3 bedrooms, and an amazing kitchen full of gadgets. I love to cook, always have, and the amount of things he had in his kitchen just sparked my imagination. I cooked dinners, baked cakes, baked pies. His kitchen was similar to mine, but bigger and with more gadgets. On Friday, we went to a party with a bunch of his medical colleagues, and I volunteered to be the designated driver. He was a little tipsy, but it was a Friday night, and although I liked him like hell, by the end of the week we were both drunk, so we had to strip naked and go to bed to cuddle each other. The next morning I woke up early, naked and silently rolled out of his bed, unfortunately not as big as mine, and headed to the bathroom. Afterwards, I headed into his kitchen to make some tea, just in time to see a Tesco delivery truck pull into his wide driveway. After putting on and buttoning the long black coat off the rack to cover my nakedness, I opened the door and took my bags, to the slight shock of the senior driver. He left with a smile, a result of my cleavage and the obvious young naked woman under Rob's coat that I saw in the mirror on the coat rack as the truck pulled away. This actually made me very happy, and I hung up his coat again. As the kettle began to boil, I unpacked the package into the refrigerator and then into the cupboards, finding a complete mess of food, most of the packaging untouched and unopened. Gathering food was a great chance for him to sneak a peek and see what cool gear he had. He had a kitchen gadget for everything, and I mean everything. There was a big Kenwood mixer, big and expensive, still wrapped in cellophane. The fryer is still with the cable attached. Next was the slow cooker, such a handy gadget for the busy healthcare professional. But, you guessed it, still in the box. He had a meat grinder, a damn meat grinder. Why would a single man who clearly doesn't know his way around the kitchen have a damn meat grinder? He didn't strike me as someone who cooked his own sausages or hamburgers. Then there was the same waffle iron I had, so I took it out of the box, wiped it down, turned it on, then mixed up some batter while it was heating up, and made a pretty reasonable stack by frying some bacon on his George Foreman grill, which had clearly previously used, I thought, typical guy. He places the oldest of 3 bottles of maple syrup, 2 mugs of freshly brewed tea, and 2 glasses of orange juice on the tray. I went upstairs and entered his bedroom just as the smell of food woke up my lover. He looked at me. Wow. "Good morning, Rob," I said, dropping the tray into his lap as he sat down, leaning against the padded headboard. He looked at the feast before him. "You." He looked stunned. "Did you get this? Delivered?" I put my hands on my bare thighs. "Delivered?" I crossed my arms over my chest, brought my breasts and nipples up to his gaze. "Fuck off," my shapely ass delivered. I whispered, shifting my body weight to one leg and combing my hair where my hair would have been if it hadn't been pulled back into a ponytail. "I prepared all this, Robert, in your kitchen." I sat down on the bed next to him and took the glass. "Waffles?" "Your waffle iron," I said. "Do I have a waffle iron?" "In the closet," I said, "next to your meat grinder, blender, and deep fryer. Sorry to pry, but I was packing your groceries while I made tea." "Oh yeah, I forgot it was this morning." "Everything is packed," I said. "Do you know how much flour you have?" He leaned over and kissed me, taking a corner of a hot wafer dipped in syrup. "I think a little less than before. You'll have to show me some recipes, naked of course." "Hurry, Tiger," I said, feeling his hand on the upper curve of my buttock. "Eat before it gets cold." We sat, ate, giggled. The whole sweet and sour thing with waffles with bacon and maple syrup passed him by. It immediately became a favorite. Despite a good breakfast and another mug of tea, Rob couldn't keep his hands off me, and we made love again without starting the night before. We chatted about some sweet nothings until he took the tray downstairs and loaded the dishwasher while I took a shower. I put on the skinny jeggings I bought the night before and a nice new fitted t-shirt, my go-to outfit for looking good and feeling good. Finally, I combed my hair, freeing it from clips, ribbons, and other decorations. Why? Because I loved it when Rob ran his fingers over it. We went for a late lunch, and he held my hand the entire time, walking through the city center and enjoying each other's company as spring tried to break through the remnants of the damp winter darkness. I could at least call myself gloomy, because that day, sitting in a coffee shop, we had our very first date. At the same table, he told me that I was so beautiful and that he was in love with me. I, of course, admitted the same. In fact, it had been a while, and the sun had risen to celebrate the occasion. I stayed at his place overnight, of course, but I ran out of clean clothes and ended up going home Sunday afternoon wearing one of his short-sleeved white shirts, buttoned all the way up and then tucked tightly in at the sides, to expose your breasts and cleavage and look so sexy and feel great. He was very grateful, and thanks to what we had admitted to each other and ourselves during the previous lunch, we spent most of the day making out on his huge couch. dragging ourselves away because I knew he had some reading and studying to do. The next morning, I had to prepare my work clothes, some of which were still in the backpack over my shoulder. I opened the front door, walked in, took my post out of the drawer, and unlocked the front door. "And I," a familiar male voice shouted as I opened the front door. I turned around. "Hi, Tony," I said. It was my turn to be friendly to avoid the happy greeting I would have added when we had sex. Yes, definitely that. I shared the most amazing lovemaking with the amazing man I was in love with. I could never describe what Tony and I did as anything other than that. To be honest, we never made love. It was only sex, and although it felt good, it was nothing compared to what Rob and I did. It was the first time I'd seen him in weeks, rushing home or to Rob's and spending all my time with him. "So," Tony said, pausing too long and clearly looking at me, "were you away over the weekend?" "Yes," I said, knowing that everything I said to Tony would come back to Louise. If I hadn't said what Tony wanted to hear, he would have walked right up to her and told her what I said. I knew he had a good line to get pity. I didn't want to mention anything about my weekend at all. Not by name, not by description, nothing. I knew that if the message got back to ALTG, she would immediately resume hostilities and shout insults through my bedroom ceiling, and I really couldn't worry about more, especially at a time when her brother was doing so well. "So, Andy," he said, looking at my feet, "I didn't eat tonight, and I thought that if you didn't eat either, then, well, maybe." "Oh, I already ate, Tony," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder with a bright smile, "and I did it along with my boyfriend. But why don't you come in and see Louise?" I stopped myself. "Oh, but then you'll have to pay for it, won't you?" I patted him on the face. "Bon appetit." I closed the door behind me. Score another goal for the good guys. I loaded the washing machine, put on soft, cozy pajamas, and sat on the bed with a mug of hot chocolate, occasionally sending Rob rude messages and telling him about my neighbor who thought he might have had a chance. I was high, with a new sense of confidence and understanding, in love with a wonderful man. The next morning, I went to work and Anna was there. "You don't have a boyfriend this morning, so Andrea?" I made sure to look around to see if Rob was standing behind me. I smiled at her, a very flat and sarcastic smile. "You know, he was just here. He probably slipped away," I said without much interest, took the card statement and went outside. She followed me. "You know where he goes after he's had enough of playing with you, Andrea? Home to his girlfriend. Not in that stupid triple bed he rents for dates with you." I expected this from her and immediately replied, "So is it with all of you, Grace, that you find someone attractive and bring them home for fun? Or is it just you and the pilots?" I winked at her. "I mean, you only moved in 9 months ago, and I counted 4 cars of varying performance parked at Tony's." It was a lie. I only counted 3, but she didn't seem to want to dispute that fact. Maybe I missed one. I could see her lower lip curl quickly. Perhaps my ongoing relationship with her brother was starting to tire her. "My brother is too good for a girl like you. Surgeon? With a damn travel agent? His girlfriend? No, his fiancée is also a doctor." I didn't bite, and I could see her brain working. "You know, they set a date. Mom is just making final arrangements before the invitations go out." She grinned evilly. "Don't worry, Andy," she grinned. "I'll make sure you get an invitation to watch the other man you loved leave. You wish him congratulations from me. Yes, and tell him that there will always be a place for him in my king-size bed." I walked up to my car, waved at her, still with my mouth open and my face dumbfounded, and drove to work. Putting on my headphones, I told Google to call Rob. A few seconds later, his phone rang, and he was quickly answered. "Andrea," he breathed with a hint of sexuality in his voice. "Good morning, Robert," I said. "Anna just told me about your girlfriend. Apparently, you've almost set a date and are living in the same house with her. I can't say I've ever seen her hanging around this place. Maybe the princess said she was just a little girl. She didn't mention it. Maybe she was standing behind the couch, and I couldn't see her the whole time I was there. I could hear the excitement in my voice just talking to him. My damn sister, he sighed. Listen, Andy, I've been at the clinic all morning and my surgery for the day was canceled. How about lunch? Come here. Meet me at the cafe at once. See you, Dr. Gray. Don't be late. Sitting in a corner booth at the Costa Hospital, just as the lunch rush was beginning to die down. I was sipping a latte when a tall, dark, and outrageously handsome orthopedic surgeon walked in, looking hot even in the dark red scrubs he was wearing. He ordered himself a coffee and grabbed a variety of plastic-wrapped snacks and sandwiches until he got to the bacon and brie panini, which were my favorites, and I nodded. He came up to me, stopped by a pair of identically dressed doctors, and they talked for a while. Freed from distractions, he sat there, took my hand, and kissed me. That was cute. Well, my gorgeous Andy, he said, you look bloody awful this lunch hour. My Andy, I was very in love with this guy. What? In all of this? I pointed to my company's uniform. Okay, I sat in the back room for 20 minutes to get my makeup done right. But still, you just need to wake up and smile to look great, Andy. I can personally attest to that. He said and squeezed my hand, but I need to make a confession. He took a bite of the wrapper and put it back on his plate. Is it true? I said. It's about my girlfriend. Anna-Louise Tyrwhitt, Bloody Gray, was partly right. I stopped chewing for a moment. What? You see, although my girl Bye doesn't live with me, I really want her to live and I want to settle down with her. For a while, I sat motionless and stupid, feeling a chill of something in his voice. What was it? I couldn't. My gorgeous Andy, he slid off the chair onto one knee, holding out the ring. Will you marry me? We only dated for 3 months. Of course, I said yes. We had a pretty sweet ceremony with everyone in attendance, including Anna, my gorgeous niece Emma as maid of honor, and her mom as maid of honor. His parents are as sweet and creepy as mine, and they all got along, and they all fell under Emma's spell. I moved in with Rob before we got married and put my downstairs apartment on the market. It all went pretty quickly, and I got all my stuff out over the weekend, not seeing Tony or my fiancé's sister, but hearing from Jane that they were leaving, and also seeing that she was now expecting twins. I'm still running my little travel agency. Rob is still working his magic with bones and muscle saws and scalpels, and I'm pregnant. And Anne-Louise Tyrwhitt Gray. A few years after our wedding, we were invited to her wedding to a certain Mr. Peter Conroy, after which the dreamy, beautifully dressed, elegantly coiffed, and now, by her own admission, pensive bride declared herself simply as Mrs. Anna Conroy. Sometimes she still acted like a cow, but life and affairs in apartments 1 to 4 were never discussed anymore. She lives in one of her father-in-law's many houses and, surprisingly, looks even more glamorous than when it was her real job. A year later, she had a baby. I was going to ask her if she understood the concept of contraception. But you know, we're a family now, and, well, why should I upset her? Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.